kvantfüüsikas ei ole objektikindlad asjad, need on võimalused. Võimalused, mille vahel saab teadvus valida. Kas saame rääkida Jumalast läbi teaduse, mis pidevalt analüüsib ja taandab kõike asjadeks? Jumal peaks olema suur tervik. Kuidas saab rääkida Jumalast üldse läbi teaduse ja veel vähem leida sellest tõestust?
This evolutionary step is completely essential for even basic survivability of human beings on this planet. We have literally managed to train whole generation of kids on the idea that everything is material. If you hear the message of quantum physics, then all you have to do in order to see that there is evidence for God in the science that we are doing now is to recognize that, well, how is God related to consciousness? That's all you need to know.
There is very definitive scientific evidence for the existence of God. And then my question to you, so what are you doing about it?
Elame maailmas, kus suur osa teadusest nõuab, et maailm piirduks selle füüsiliste mõõdetavate aspektidega. Müstikud aga ignoreerivad suures osas teaduse rolli ja püüavad maailma selgitada ainult vaimsuse kaudu. On haruldane, et ühendatakse teadus ja vaimsus. Hea võimalus oli näha Eestis maailmas tunnustatud kvantfüüsikut Dr Amit Goswamit. Eestiga seob teda Lille Lindmäe, kes peab loenguid ja on konsultant Dr Amit Goswami asutatud kvantülikoolis. Siin võiks öelda, et ekstrasensid ja teadlased teevad lõpuks ometi koostööd.
Utsav is a friend of mine. He went to attend a 10-day workshop that I gave last year in connection with a new educational system that I'm deploying, which talks about consciousness and quantum physics, quantum science, theory of not only consciousness but all the human systems that we have developed as conscious beings. And so, we liked each other, and Lille I have met a few months before then. So the combination was irresistible when Preet expressed the desire that I should come to Tallinn and talk about the stuff that I do. And that's why I'm here, and I'm delighted that I'm here. The energies are very good.
Goswami kirjutab oma uuemas raamatus Kõigi vastuste raamat, et oleme jõudnud aega, et ühendada teadus ja vaimsus. Kui käsitleda vaimsust ja teadust tasakaalus, pakub see uut laadi võimalus kõigile ja kõiges. Kvantfüüsika annab selleks parimad võimalused.
Closest I remember is that I was born and brought up in India and lived in India until I was 26 when I shifted. And I do remember my childhood upbringing with my parents very, very well. And it had many good aspects. For one thing, I was allowed to be homeschooled until I was 11. That was very, very good for me. The culture was very spiritual. We literally had almost every other day a celebration of some kind of worshipping some kind of god or goddess, stories, myths, and then of course we would eat this wonderful prasadam. My father used to teach me the Upanishads, the Hindu treatises, philosophical treatises that lays out the nature of reality more or less, defining what I call monastic idealism. I do not think I understood much of it at that time, but it left a very strong impression on me. Also the struggle for independence that was going on simultaneously. My father was sort of like a Brahmin guru. He had some disciples and they used to come and take his advice. The parenting education that I got was finished by 9 o'clock in the morning, 7 to 9, that was all. And the rest of the day I had to myself. So that was all very nice. The part that was not nice and eventually made me quit the spiritual lessons that my parents were trying to instill in me was the inconsistencies that I saw in their behavior. At once they would tell me that all is one, consciousness is one, and we are all potentially one with everybody, and we should love each other and all this. But at the same time, I saw that although both my father and mother were spiritual beings, I could see that too, but I also would see them quite inconsistent. For example, my mother's relationship with my sisters-in-law, her daughters-in-law, were clearly very far from the image that I had how spiritual beings should behave. And my father similarly were very unkind to one of his own sons who had a habit of stammering. And he would very cruelly, I thought, would mimic his stammering, and the fellow was clearly hurt by that. So these inconsistencies drew me, I think, to science. The idea that theories should be verified with experimental data. I was especially curious about what science would say about this concept of all people being one.
Born in India, Amit Goswami left the traditional religious settings of his childhood to study physics. He received his doctorate in nuclear physics from Calcutta University in 1964. In response to the growing international attention to his work, Goswami has been involved in numerous speaking engagements worldwide. He is the author of many books translated into 9 languages. His books include the highly regarded university textbook Quantum Mechanics, which serves as the standard introduction in many universities to the essential mathematics of quantum physics, as well as Goswami's later books, which focus on his more innovative and mystical interpretations. Having retired Professor Emeritus of Theoretical Quantum Physics from the University of Oregon, where he taught since 1968, Amit is currently a teacher at the Holmes Institute, the Philosophical Research Institute in Los Angeles, as well as Unipaz in Portugal.
So I have been certainly helped by a lot of scientists, but on the whole though, I must say that this has been a pretty lonely journey, because the mainstream scientists, they still do not pay much attention, although there is a tacit agreement now that yes, the consciousness solution of quantum physics is relevant and it does work, but still they do not really look at with full attention that the ideas that I have proposed and written about, and they are being used in psychology and medicine, they don't really look at the import of that. I mean, they're revolutionary concepts. We literally have solved 5,000-year-old problems about what consciousness is, what meaning and mind is about, what feelings are about. I feel very sad that the scientific community is fundamentally oblivious about these things, because if they were paying attention, progress could have been so much faster. To reduce our internal experience to movement of molecules and atoms, this reductionistic program does not go far enough to explain all of the internal subtle phenomena. So let's concentrate on how do religions look at God for a second. Again, when you first look at it, you find that Christians give one answer, Hindus give another answer, Muslims give a very different answer, and Buddhists say there is no God at all. All religions agree that there is some cause outside of these material causes, and they call that downward causation. And the phrase is very appropriate because it is just what we need to complement upward causation from matter. Second thing that religions posit is also a concept that contradicts the standard science squarely. And this is the idea that aside from gross material body, aside from the gross material object, there is a subtle body, a subtle world, consisting of subtle objects. Understand the subtle body as not gross, not material. Gross, we can all together experience, we can develop a consensus reality about the gross, about the material world. We cannot develop a similar consensus reality about what is internal to us. This has caused the gross division of subtle, gross, mind, matter. These are just a dichotomy that is imposed upon us by our experiences. We cannot deny it. Now, whereas materialist science says that there is no reality to the subtle, subtle is part of the gross itself, what spiritual traditions pose is that now the subtle is as much part of reality in its own right as is the gross. Well, the fundamental work that I did is still the most important work in my view. The fundamental work that I did was to interpret quantum physics in a paradox-free way. And this brought in Heisenberg and von Neumann's vision into proper paradox-free manner in a way that consciousness becomes the fundamental being of reality. That to me was very important because not only does it give quantum physics its paradox-free interpretation, but it establishes a genuine theory of something that has eluded us for 5,000 years. Namely, is there a science behind consciousness? You know, the basic thing that is about ourselves that we noticed ever since we learned to speak and we are not a baby anymore is that we experience things, we talk about ourselves as an I, and we obviously are enchanted by this I and what it does. And yet, you know, one of the things that I was always surprised, that we pay so much attention to physics, chemistry, and biology, but we don't really pay any attention to understanding consciousness.
First, let's dispense with the idea that consciousness can be a material consciousness. I'm sure that some of you think, and I don't blame you for thinking that, because at the schools we almost get such ideas today. We almost get such ideas that brain is everything and consciousness is a brain phenomenon. But look at what happens if consciousness were a brain phenomenon. In quantum physics, we have possibilities, right? So we have possible elementary particles creating possible atoms, giving us possible molecules, making possible neurons, making possible brain, giving you possible consciousness. Can possible consciousness convert possibilities of elementary particles into actual events? If you couple possibility to possibility, have you tried that? Let's try it. Everybody think of possible money in your bank. And you think of possible cars. Will that ever get you an actual car in your garage? Possibility coupled to possibility can only give us more possibility, never actuality. So we call this a paradox. We call this a paradox, quantum measurement paradox. But calling it a paradox just begs the question. Paradox is pointing out to the inadequacy of the materialist worldview.
And really, it was amazing that nobody knew anything about consciousness for so long in a scientific way. I could understand the problem because, of course, physics is about objects, chemistry about objects, but biology, can that be about objects? Isn't living about the subject that lives? So these things were always kind of puzzling to me. Why doesn't science try to understand consciousness as a most fundamental endeavor? Because doesn't that define the human being? Of course, I myself would always shy away because I'm just a physicist and consciousness is a problem of psychology was my upbringing. But then I realized that no, consciousness may belong to everyone. And when I discovered von Neumann's work especially, and Heisenberg's work I already knew, then I realized that quantum physics is actually the answer to consciousness. It's built into things that way because human beings got to have a hint, and the hint is given through quantum physics. Quantum physics is the science of consciousness.
Religions always say, do good, be good. Simple message. Practice some virtues. In today's world, you can see the benefit of that. So this one we can all agree on. Unfortunately, of course, there is a difficulty, which is that good for you may not be good for me.
When somebody hears the idea that we, consciousness after all is we are conscious, we are part of that conscious being, and when you say consciousness chooses out of quantum possibilities, we get the idea that, well, hey, we choose our own reality. It's great. I'll choose a reality which gives me right away a BMW.
I don't know how good creators you are, but in the 70s, and some of you will relate to this, we used to play with this. There were organizations which used to teach how to manifest things. And some people would seriously meditate on manifesting a Cadillac.
But we think, we intend, we meditate, we wait, no car in our garage. Why is that?
Consciousness is subtle. It's not our immediate consciousness that we experience. The immediate consciousness that I experience is called my ego.
And indeed, in 1982, Alain Aspect, a great physicist in France, and his collaborators, they discovered, measured such communication indeed exists. It astounded the world of physics, and ever since, physics has never been the same. And incidentally, that instant communication establishes the oneness that puzzled me so much in my childhood, the unity consciousness about which I thought there could never be any verification. How do you show that there is underlying unity among people when obviously separateness dominates our behavior? And now physics, the world of physics itself was saying that yes, there is potential unity between objects. All they have to do is to interact and they become one. And then from that it took me 4 years, but eventually I was able to conceptualize. I had a creative insight that showed that consciousness is the ground of being, and objects are quantum possibilities for consciousness to choose from. So consciousness is that oneness, and two objects can interact and become correlated because consciousness then comes into play between them and mediates their instant communication.
For example, when we pray, if you watch carefully, if you listen carefully to what the prayer groups actually do, you will notice that at the end of the prayer, they surrender to God. They will say, thy will be done. Or they will say, if it be thy will. So they know, the spiritual groups, from their own experience, purely empirically, that it is not my will but thy will. Only if my intention resonates with the intention of the whole, intention of the divine, then the intention will manifest. So this distinction is an extremely important distinction.
As far as doing, there is a very, very beautiful way of being creative. I call it the doobie-doobie-doo way of life. It turns out that when we do, we are very scatterbrained, we are doing, but we are not focused. If we do in a focused way, and then not do incessantly, because the human brain is not capable of continuously focused doing, we get tired. In between, we relax. This brings into mind the idea of meditation. So quantum physics supports meditation in a huge way. Meditation, we have focusing, doing meditation, as also relaxing meditation. We can call them being meditation. And this doobie-doobie-doo is a very beautiful way of becoming creative. And then once we are creative, we have the creative experience, and then when we manifest the creative experience, then that flow experience happens between the quantum self and the ego. So the lifestyle of a quantum activist then is not only flow, but flow has to be preceded by this doobie-doobie-doo way of life. And what can we do to promote it? The two kinds of meditation. One is the focusing meditation, and another is the relaxation meditation. One is meditation on an object, the other is meditation on the subject. If we do these kinds of meditation some of the time engage in creative flow, manifesting our creative insights, then we are indeed living like a quantum aficionado.
There is another way of thinking of this whole thing that we are missing. And quantum physics is forcing us down that road. It's forcing us to recognize that we don't choose in our individuality that we call the ego. Instead, there is a unity behind us. We are all connected in some place where there is this cosmic consciousness engulfing everything.
Quantum activism. Well, this is an intriguing phrase, and it is intended that way. The first thing that came to my mind when I coined the phrase and started a movement was that quantum physics is not really getting much attention from the scientists, partly because the physics is difficult to understand, traditionally has been difficult to understand, but that's because of the prejudice of scientific materialism. As soon as you give up the prejudice, my work proves that it is very easy to understand, that objects are possibilities for consciousness to choose from. Nevertheless, there is a lot of reluctance on the part of the main body of scientists to give up the idea of scientific materialism, in spite of the fact that we have quantum non-locality, which does not fit the Newtonian model at all. According to Newtonian physics, there can only be space and time, there can only be separateness. To have the idea that there could be underlying unity is unthinkable in Newtonian physics. To have the idea that consciousness can choose among the potentiality to make actuality is unthinkable. We cannot introduce consciousness in Newtonian physics because it's deterministic. Consciousness has to have indeterminacy or uncertainty built into the physics in order for consciousness to play a role. Freedom is part of consciousness. New possibility is part of consciousness. New possibilities to choose from. So I thought that we should have activism to change the attitude of scientists towards quantum physics. That was my first thinking. But then I realized that it is much more than that, because a quantum activist not only needs to persuade other people as to the usefulness or veracity of quantum science for human affairs, but it is also a fact that the weapon in the hands of the quantum physicist is persuasion. Change the other person's choice. The other person's choice can be Newtonian physics or quantum physics. And the quantum physicist has to persuade the other, not use force, because that's not allowed in quantum physics. Consciousness works through choice. So how can you persuade? You can persuade only if you have shown the efficacy of the ideas that you are trying to persuade in your own life, because you are trying to say that, look, if you live the quantum way, you will be better off. But if you have not shown the efficacy in your own life, obviously your credibility is not so good. So quantum activism then must be formulated as the idea of changing one's own life, living the quantum principles. And as you do that, as you prove the efficacy of the quantum principles to live life, you propose to others, persuade others that, look, here is a better system for human beings to live by, and therefore you pay attention to quantum physics. Therefore you pay attention to changing human social systems with quantum physics. But only because quantum physics gives you the ability to change yourself, transform yourself. So in this way, from the get-go, quantum activism has been a movement of really integrating science and spirituality in a person's own life, and then bring the impact of that, what happens to human social systems if science and spirituality are indeed integrated.
It's a little bit subtle. That's why manifestation doesn't always work. We have to get into an altered state of consciousness. Then we can do a lot with our intention. And there is experimental data proving that.
I got a call from this Mexican neurophysiologist, Jacobo Greenberg, who said to me that he has some very interesting data that he is not quite able to interpret, but I might be very interested in. So I said, what kind of data? He said, well, this is two people communicating without exchanging signals.
This is called non-locality in quantum physics. Without local signals, signals going through space and time. If such communication is occurring, we would say that yes, these people are connected via non-local consciousness.
I said, yes, I would be very much interested. In fact, that's one of the predictions of the solution of quantum measurement theory that I have. And he said, I know. And so he invited me to come and check out his laboratory, check out his experimental setup. So I went to University of Mexico in Mexico City. I saw that indeed how the experiment was conducted, which was that two people meditate together for 20 minutes with the intention that they will have a non-local communication.
Now, this interconnection to consciousness extends outside of space and time. It does not require a signal to communicate. That's the beauty of it.
So two people meditate together for 20 minutes with the intention that they communicate non-locally, directly, without exchange of any signals. After the 20 minutes, they are separated, put in individual Faraday chambers. These are electromagnetically impervious chambers. They still maintain that meditative state of intention. Now their brains are connected to individual EEG machines, electroencephalogram. One subject, and only one subject, is shown a series of light flashes. This obviously produces electromagnetic activity in the brain, and this electrical activity is recorded in the brain waves in the EEG connected to the brain. From that, a potential can be extracted, which is called evoked potential evoked by the light flashes. The other subject in the meantime is just meditating. There is no light flash for him or her. But the EEG machine connected to the brain of the second observer, who doesn't see any light flashes, nevertheless depict a transferred potential very similar in both phase and strength to the evoked potential that the first observer's EEG gives us. How does electrical activity transfer from one brain to another without any electromagnetic connection, without any signal? The answer is quantum non-locality. The answer is that non-local consciousness collapses similar events in both brains because through their intention they have become correlated non-locally. There is no other way of understanding this result. Now for a while, scientists objected, okay, maybe Hakubo's methodology was not quite right, maybe there was something wrong with the statistics. But then in 1998, Peter Fenwick in London and his collaborators reproduced the results. The results were again reproduced by another couple of experiments in the early 2000s. The latest one was in 2004 by Liana Standish and her collaborators at Bastille University in Seattle. Brains can communicate non-locally, proving that consciousness is indeed non-local. It's cosmic. Consciousness that chooses from quantum possibilities making an actual event, consciousness that creates this universe of manifestation is indeed non-local consciousness.
Now you can call it God if you like. You don't have to. It's objective. It's objective and it's scientific.
Oh, quantum physics, just literal meaning, is just it's the physics of elementary particles, physics of elementary quantities of matter and energy. That's what quantum physics is. But obviously, that's an extremely limited definition. Limited definition because it's defining a physics with respect to the objects it governs. But how can that be? That never has been the intention. If that was the intention, then Newton's physics was constructed with material objects in mind. But did we hesitate to apply Newtonian physics to behavioral psychology? We didn't. We said that no, the same idea of Newtonian physics applies, and indeed human behavior was found to conform to the same kind of Newtonian predict and control kind of aspect. So we always gain by taking an idea which was initially created for a limited application in mind into much bigger applications. The power of quantum physics in human affairs reveals itself when we realize that even the behavior of the elementary particles, even they are dependent on conscious choice. consciousness plays a role. And since consciousness plays a role, it is automatic that we will look at all conscious experience and look at them as quantum phenomena. So in this way, it's very natural, the expansion that I have suggested, that the quantum physics be extended to the behavior of mental objects and objects of feeling, is quite natural, because they have the same quantum properties that is the characteristic of material objects, such as signal-less communication or non-locality, discontinuity of quantum leaps that Niels Bohr originally discovered. So these things are common for material objects as well as mental objects as well as objects of feeling. They all have non-locality, they all have discontinuous quantum leaps. So it is very natural to explain their behavior too with the same quantum physics as matter. And then it becomes a very powerful science for predicting human behavior. Then we can make models of things that we could not have made before, such as models of creativity, such as models of evolution, models of reincarnation even, ideas that we never could even touch before. We can now not only touch, but we can treat and predict new phenomena. Is that good?
First stage is called preparation. This one you already know. You go to a lecture, you read a book. Preparation is getting acclimatized, familiar with what is already known. Then creativity researchers say that you just sit on it, incubation, like a bird sits on the egg doing nothing. This is a little bit hard to believe for a modern person who is convinced of a do lifestyle. You are basically convinced of the fact that doing is important and being is secondary. But that's not what these creativity researchers are finding. They are finding that being is as important, doing followed by being. Now, people didn't understand this for a long time, until quantum physics came along and showed us how. Because doing means you convert possibility into actuality. In between doing, what happens? The possibilities grow and grow and grow and grow. Possibilities proliferate. Now anybody knows if there are more possibilities to choose from, my chance of choosing the correct possibility that will answer my problem is better. Isn't that true? It's obvious. So therefore, we have to allow some time between episodes of doing. But you cannot allow too much time, because if you did, then you would be defocused completely. You will forget what the question was.
The fundamental message of quantum physics actually is that life should be lived in a way that conforms to our being. Since our being is fundamentally based on this unity consciousness, so we should spend bulk our life in the exploration of that unity. And that suggests that we engage a bulk of our day to what is called creativity. Because the unity consciousness lies in the new part of the unconscious. Unconscious has the old part, the memory part, which dominates our conscious experience. We are always thinking of memories, and in that we are living in the past, we are living in the known. Whereas the real life part of consciousness, the interesting part of consciousness, which is this part which we have not explored before, the new part. Of course, the new part has to be expressed in terms of what we already know. Expression requires the known, So the lesson of quantum living is very clear. We should live in such a way that we constantly encounter the new in a creative experience, and then we make representation of the new in terms of the old. So we need the ego for that also. So quantum physics suggests this is quite different from traditional spirituality. In traditional spirituality, the goal is to give up the ego and embrace the quantum self completely. The unity is everything. Quantum worldview is not talking like that. Quantum worldview is saying that the best is really to have both. We need the new because that's where the essence of consciousness is, but in order to express the new, we need the old. Otherwise, there is no expression. So we need both. Now, this state in creativity, which allows one to be both in the ego and in the quantum self, alternatively, in a flow, is called the flow experience. This is one of the more recent discoveries of psychology. And this is the model fit for a quantum activist. Quantum activists who live in a creative flow, in a state of creative flow, neither in the ego, like the traditional scientific materialist, nor in the quantum self, like the traditional spiritual being, but in a mixture of both, which is also turns out to be a very joyful state. Big advantage is that you can be enlightened in some sense because you are encountering the unity, but at the same time you are enjoying it. I call it the state of having your cake and also eating it. Best of both worlds. Truly an integration of science, which prefers this end, and spirituality, which prefers that end. Quantum physics says, be in the middle, enjoy both.